Good afternoon. We after having deal with the behaviorism as an approach in psychology and psychoanalysis also, which is another approach. We will deal now with another approach which is not less important. And here I mention the well-known approach in psychology, which is named by Gestalt psychology. And I will share, first of all, I will share with you the PDF format or file. Then we'll discuss about, we'll deal critically with this text about Gestalt psychology that I brought from the volume number 3, from the page 486 to 189 from the Encyclopedia of Psychology that was edited by Kasdin, and I chose this text, which is defining the approach named Gestalt psychology. And first of all, Gestalt psychology was one of the major schools of psychology of the first half of the 20th century. And as we mentioned, this approach is a classical approach in psychology because it appeared during the first half of the 20th century. Why its main early focus was a protest against the atomism or the elementism that characterized its rival schools. And here we noticed that Gestalt theory was, or more precisely, it appeared against another theories that was in characterizing the field of psychology, and various, as we noticed, that various theories and approaches are appearing as a reaction, as a critic against another theories. It is the case of behaviorism, because before the apparition of behaviorism, religious beliefs and theology was explaining various psychological phenomena, and these explanations were based on intuition and interpretations without scientific rules. But behaviorism appeared as a scientific approach that was influenced by various positive results that came from the exact sciences and natural sciences, and consequently behaviorism appeared as an approach that its main goal is to apply the objectivity and scientific, more precisely scientific objectivity to psychological phenomena. The reason why behaviorism was from its first time that appeared, it was focusing on behavior, because the behavior is the criteria by which we can analyze, objectively speaking, the personality of this or that personality, and the based on his or her behavior. The same thing could be said about psychoanalysis, because psychoanalysis was focusing on the unconscious forces, and it was also referring to the ego and the superego. But the most important point is that even psychoanalysis was referring to what is hidden, but this theory was applying free associations as a technique by which the analyst can do an interview, a scientific interview with his patient, and based on this scientific interview, the analyst can understand the patient, and at the same time, the analyst can encourage his patient to go over his psychological difficulties, because the analyst will try to encourage the patient to remember his historical life, based on coming back to his or her childhood period, and consequently, by understanding this period, the patient will overcome his psychological crisis, and he will become a subject, which means that the subject is mastering his history, and he is conscious about history, because he tried to transform his unconscious life to its conscious existence, and this is the goal of psychoanalysis. Now, when we refer to Gestalt psychology, this approach was also against another approaches in psychology, like the atomism. And here, when we refer to atomism, we can give this example for this example. And here, for example, the atomism is reductionist, is referring to reductionism. At some point, a psychological theory focused on reducing complex phenomena into their most basic parts. Here, from atomism, when we perceive something, we perceive it partially, and we disconnect its parts, and will focus on the whole parts, not on the whole image, but we will focus on each part which is composing the image. Like here, for example, for reaching the meaning of the car, I will see all these parts of the cards, each part of the cards mentioned here as A, B, C, D, etc. And based on perceiving each part of the car, I will say this is a car. And of course, this is the tendency of explaining phenomena or psychological phenomena in reductionism or atomism, and a Gestalt theory or approach was against this kind of this kind of explanation or atomistic or elementist explanations of phenomena. And why? Because and it was also Geshe psychology was also against behaviorists, because behavior is always focusing on the behavior, and the behavior is the consequence of external forces and external influences of the environment and external conditions, etc. Compared to that, compared to elementism and atomism and reductionism and behaviorism, Gestalt psychology or Gestalt approach, or Gestalt psychology approach, or the approach of Gestalt psychology is focusing on the whole. It is focusing on configuration, on the global structure. The reason why when we refer to Gestalt psychology, it is important to point out the German word Gestalt, because roughly speaking, or globally speaking, this word in German language refer or the meaning of this word in German language mentioning Gestalt, it is referring to at the same time to structure, to the idea of the whole rather than the parts, to the idea of the form or the global form, and also configuration. The reason why all these meanings are referring to the idea of Gestalt, and because the word Gestalt is conveying various and multiple and connected meanings, as we mentioned, a structure, a whole, the idea of the whole, and the global structure and the form and configuration, and because this word has no an exact equivalent in English, the vocabulary of or psychologists kept this word, I mean Gestalt, and who scholars who created this approach kept this word, and they performed it as a concept, and the reason why we mentioned the concept of Gestalt psychology, because it has not an exact equivalent in English, and also in French, because even in French we say la psychologie de la Gestalt. Sometimes we translate it to la psychologie de la forme, even that it is not an exact translation from German to French, and the same thing could be said about no exact equivalent in English, even that English is closer to German compared to the connection between French and English. And this concept became a part of the technical vocabulary of psychology, and it is still the case now. It is still the case now, because we are still coming back to this theory named Gestalt psychology, or Gestalt psychology approach, or the approach of Gestalt psychology. It depends on each scholar and each academic book or dictionary or encyclopedia that is using this or that denomination, but in all denominations we cannot avoid or dismiss the word Gestalt. The idea of the whole and the idea of the structure and the form is very important in Gestalt psychology. And here we can also refer to this the idea of the whole, because here, for example, if we take into account this this image that you are, or this picture that you are seeing, we have this in this picture two sub pictures. We have the picture which is on the left, and we have the picture which is on the right. And in the picture which is on the left, when we compare it to the picture of the which is on the left and on the right, we have this tendency to see and to be more comfortable with the picture which is on the right, and even that the picture which is on the left contains the same components of what we can see in the picture on the right. This is a bicycle, and this is the elements in the left. We are seeing the elements that are composing the bicycle, because this picture is conveying to us a meaning, which is a bicycle. We have this tendency to see this image spontaneously and at the first glance, and we can see the image which is on the left at the second time. And from this perspective, you can say that the perception of human perception has this tendency to see the whole, as here in the picture in the right, because we are seeing a bicycle, and we have not this tendency to see partial elements. That rather than that, we have the tendency to see the same elements in an organized form. And from this perspective, we can say that Gestalt theory are mentioning the importance to focus on the whole rather than to focus on the parts, or in other words, the whole is more than its parts. And also we are seeing and perceiving the whole before perceiving the parts. And even in this bicycle there are partial elements, but at the first time you are seeing the whole form, then we are perceiving the parts that are constituting the whole image, which is the bicycle. And this is very important in Gestalt psychology, because Gestalt psychology is focusing on the idea that the whole is more than its parts. Now, coming back to come back to our course. Yes, and this is the first part of the first idea, which is very important in Gestalt psychology. The reason why Gestalt psychology rejected the constancy hypothesis that was generally taken for granted early in the 20th century, namely that there is a constant point-for-point correspondence between physical characteristics of stimulus and the psychological attributes of the resulting sensation. And here, Gestalt psychologists rejected the constancy hypothesis because this idea of or this hypothesis, named the constancy hypothesis, started and focused on the idea that there is a correspondence, an exact correspondence between physical characteristic of stimulus, which is external to our to human perception, and what we are perceiving. In other words, what we perceive in our mind is exactly what is exactly what characterizes the stimulus that I am perceiving from the internal of my mind or brain. It means that the image which is inside my brain is similar to the object perceived, and which is in the external world. And this idea of total correspondence between what is external and what is internal, between the stimulus and the content of my perception, this idea was rejected and seriously criticized by Gestalt psychologists, saying that there is the perception is what we perceive can be reshaped by our perception, and the reason why that what is external as an object in the external world is change by its form and its meaning when it is perceived by the subject. And this is the main critique toward constancy hypothesis, which was expressed by Gestalt psychology and Gestalt psychologists, of course. And this is an important idea that reflect Gestalt psychology. And thank you for your attention, and we will continue in the next session what we are mentioning now.